Good afternoon students and welcome all of you in this online class of English course. So, let us start a new chapter today, Landscape of the Soul, chapter 4, Hornbill. So, here in this chapter the writer contrasts two forms of art, Chinese art and European art by using two different stories. In China during 8th century, the Tang Emperor Zhuangzong commissioned a painter Wu Daozi to decorate a wall in the palace. So, this is the descriptions. So, here these stories reveal to how art form is believed to be followed in two different part. Europe in artist knows the viewer to see a real viewpoint by borrowing his eyes. The art must be perfect and must be that illusions likeness. Whereas in China, the artist doesn't paint a real one but uses his inner spiritual voice to create an abstract piece. The viewer can enter the painting from any point and can travel according to his own imagination. The artist wants the viewer to enter his mind and create a path of his own. This concept is called sansui, which means mountain water, and when they are used together, they make the world landscape. So, let us start the story now. A wonderful old tale is told about the painter Wu Daozi who lived in 8th century. A wonderful old tale is told about the painter Wu Daozi who lived in the 8th century. His last painting was a landscape commissioned by the Tang Emperor Zhuangzong to decorate a palace wall. The master had hidden his work behind a screen so only the emperor would see it. For a long while, the emperor admired the wonderful scene, discovering forests, high mountains, waterfalls, clouds, floating an immense sky, man on hilly paths, birds in flight. Look, sire, said the painter, in the cave at the foot of the mountain, and during that dwells a spirit. The painter clapped his hands, and the entrance to the cave opened. The inside is splendid beyond anything words can convey. Please let me show your majesty the way the painter entered the cave, but the entrance closed behind him, and before the astonished emperor could move or utter a word, the painting had vanished from the wall. Not a trace of Wu Daozi's brush was left, and the artist was never seen again in this world. Just note down few words like dwells means lives, splendid means very impressive, superb, astonished means greatly surprised or impressed. So, a painter named Wu Daozi who lived in the 8th century was assigned to decorate a palace wall by the Tang Emperor Zhuangzong. By whom? Tang Emperor Zhuangzong. It was his last painting and the painter had hid his work behind the screen so the only emperor could see it. The emperor, upon looking at the painting, admired many things into the painting like discovering forest, high mountains, waterfalls, floating clouds, man on hilly paths and birds in flight. The painter then made him look at the cave in the painting which was at the foot of the mountain and compared it with a living spirit. As the painter clapped his hand, the entrance of the cave opened and he let the emperor know how beautiful the inside of the cave was, and he asked him to show all this to him. The painter entered the cave and the entrance closed behind him. The emperor couldn't enter the cave as the emperor was generally and greatly surprised. The painting vanished from the wall, and after that the painter was never seen again. Moving to the next part, next para. Such stories played an important part in China's classical education. The books of Confucius and Zhuangzi are full of them. They help the master to guide his disciple in the right direction, and beyond the anecdote, they are deeply revealing of the spirit in which art was considered. Contrast this story or another famous one about a painter who wouldn't draw his eyes off a dragon he had painted for fear it would fly out of the painting, with an old story from the native Flanders that I find most representative of Western painting. So, these stories played an important role in classical education, China's. Similarly, the books of Confucius and Zhuangzi are full of such stories. They help the master to help and guide his followers in the right direction. These stories were considered to be deeply revealing of the spirit just like art, and there was another famous story in contrast to the previous one where the painter wouldn't paint the eye of a dragon. He feared that the dragon would fly out of the painting, and it was one of the stories from many others which came from a medieval country in Western Europe. Correct. So, these stories, disciple means what, you know, that a follower or what that, a student. Anecdote means a short and interesting story of a real person. Anecdote. Flanders, that is a medieval country in the Western Europe. Okay, that medieval, that we will get to know that here is given after that. So, in 15th century Antwerp, what happened? A master blacksmith called Quinton Metzies fell in love with the painter's daughters. The father would not accept the sons-in-law in such a profession. So, Quinton sneaked into the painter's studio and painted fly on the latest panel with such delicate realism that the master tried to sweat it away before he realized what had happened to him. Quinton was immediately admitted as an apprentice into the studio, and he married his beloved and went to become one of the most famous painters of his age. These two stories illustrate what each form of art is trying to achieve: a perfect illusionistic likeness in Europe, the essence of inner life, and the spirit in Asia. So, what is that Antwerp means? A city of northern Belgium. Delicate realism means the quality of art that makes it seem real. Okay. Apprentice means trainees, trainer, learner, trainee, not trainer, sorry, learner. And illusionistic likeness and illusions created with resemble something. So, during the 15th century Antwerp, a master blacksmith named Quinton Metzies fell in love with a painter's daughter. Since the father was not accepting this relationship before his professions, the blacksmith sneaked into the painter's studio and painted a fly on his latest panel. The painting was so real that the master tried to hit the fly away before he realized that it was just a painting. The blacksmith was accepted into the studio, and trainees, he married the painter's daughter and later became one of the famous painters of his age. The two stories told above are trying to illustrate the form of art in two different regions. In Europe, the art is perfect like an illusion which resembles something. In Asia, art gives an essence of inner life and spirit. Moving to the next para. In Chinese story, the emperor commissions a painting and appreciates its outer appearing, but artist reveals to him the true meaning of his work. The emperor may rule over the territory he had conquered, but only the artist knows the way with him. Let me show the way, the thou, the word that means both the path of the method and the mysterious works of the universe. The painting is gone, but the artist has reached his goal beyond any material appearance. Correct? So, let me explain this one. In Chinese landscape, painting is made in real viewpoint, represent of the artist's thoughts. Correct? So, artist reveals to him the true meaning of the art. The European painter paints a landscape to show you a specific scene of the landscape, whereas the Chinese painter does not choose a real viewpoint. So, this is the difference between two different picture and art. Correct? So, if we will talk about the Chinese landscape, if we will talk about the Chinese stories, the emperor may rule over the territory and the conquered, but here that one meaning is coming, that is thou, that means the both the path is of this method, that is mysterious works of the universe. Painting is gone, but the artist has reached his goal, that is the definite ultimate goal or attainment, you could say like that. Classical Chinese landscape is not meant to reproduce an actual view. Correct? As would a Western figurative painting, whereas then the European painter wants you to borrow his eyes and look at the particular landscape exactly he saw it from the specific angle. The Chinese painter does not choose a single viewpoint. His landscape is not a real one and you can enter it from any point, then travel it. The artist creates a path for your eyes to travel up and down and then back again in a leisurely movement. This is even more true in case of the horizontal scroll, in which the action of slowly opening one section of the painting, the rolling of the other to move on to the other sides adds a dimension of time which is unknown to any other form of painting. it also requires the active participation of the viewer who decides that what pace would travel through the painting, participation which is a physical as well as the mental. The Chinese painter does not want to borrow his eyes, he wants you to enter his mind. The landscape is an inner one, spiritual and conceptual scale. Correct? It is a conceptual space. So, the Chinese landscape painting is made with the real viewpoint, is a representation of artist's thoughts. Western painting in Europe is a figurative one, that is a European painter paints a landscape is to show you specific scene of the landscape, whereas the Chinese painter does not choose a real viewpoint. You can enter the painting from the any point of view, travel anywhere where your thoughts and imagination takes you. The Chinese artist wants you to travel by creating your own path and then come out in a relaxed moment. In China, this mode of seeing painting is more enjoyable. Horizontal scroll is formed where the one section of the painting is opened by the another, rolling it move from the other side, creates a dimension which is not practiced in any other form of the artwork. It requires both mental, physical participation of the viewer. Chinese painter wants you to enter the mind and see the painting from his own thoughts. The landscape created by Chinese art is spiritual, inner and conceptual or abstract space. Correct? Figurative painting is a metaphoric representation of art. Leisurely means unhurried. Conceptual space means relation with an abstract representation. Moving to the next para. The concept is expressed as sansui. Okay. Literally means it's mountain water which used together to represent the word landscape more than two elements of an image. These represent two complementary poles reflecting the Taoist view of the universe. The mountain is young, reaching vertically towards the heaven, stable, warm, dry in the sun, while the water is in the horizontal, resting on the earth, fluid, moist, cool. The interaction of yang in the receptive, the feminine aspect of the universal energy, and it is the counterpart yang, active and masculine, is of course a fundamental notion of Taoism. What is often overlooked is an essential third element, the middle void, where the interaction takes place. This can be compared with a yoga practice, yogic practice, pranayama, breathe in, retain, breathe out. The suspension of breath is the void where the meditation occurs, and the middle void is essential. Nothing can happen without it. Hence, the importance of the while unpainted space, that is a Chinese landscape. Correct? And this is where the man finds a fundamental role in what that space between heaven and earth that becomes the most conduit of the communication between both poles and the universe. His presence is essential, even if it is not only suggested far from being lost or oppressed the lofty peaks. He is Francois the Cheng's wonderful expressions. Francois Cheng's wonderful expression. What? The eye of the landscape. So, the Chinese concept of art is also expressed sansui, which also means mountain water. It is used together to represent the word landscape. The two complementary poles of an image reflect the Taoist view. The mountain is the landscape of the yang, which means to reach the vertically towards heaven, stable, warm, dry in the sun, whereas in the water is the yin, which is receptive and the feminine aspect of the universal energy. Yang is more active and masculine, the opposite of the yin. There is a third essential element, which is middle void, which is the place where they interact. This middle void can be compared to pranayama, which means to breathe in, retain and breathe out. Here the suspension of the breathe in, the void in the meditation occurs in its essential part, as nothing can happen without it. Hence, the white unpainted space in the Chinese landscape equally important. And that is also where man finds a fundamental role in space between heaven and earth. He becomes the conduit of communications between both poles of the universe. His presence is essential, even if it is only suggested far from being lost or oppressed by the lofty peaks. And he is, in Francois the Cheng's wonderful expression, the eye of the landscape. Okay, conduit means what? Channel tube. Oppressed means burdened, worried, and lofty means tall or high. So, man's presence is essential. It is not being lost or suppressed due to the high peaks, but it is the eye of the landscape according to the Francois Cheng's expression. Okay, so this concludes the part 1, and there is something here in that part 2. So, it is also inside the book. Many of you, you have the belief that his story concludes here only, but not. There is a small part that to be also recounted, getting inside the outsider art. So, here the author has focused, is given the expressions that today's art, that form is diminishing, and the painter or the artist or the drawer does not have the practical knowledge. They do not have the certificates or the training that should definitely they had gone through. Okay. So, this is called the modern art, outsider art, getting inside. When French painter the Jean Duffet mooted means thought, the concept of the art brute in the 1940s, the art of the untrained visionary was in minority interest. From its almost veiled beginnings, outsider art has gradually become the fastest growing area of interest in today's world in contemporary art internationally. This genre is described as the art of those who have no right to be artists, as they have received no formal training. They do not have that any formal training, yet show the talent and artistic insight. Their works are a stimulating contrast to a lot of mainstream offerings. Around the time that Duffet was propounding his concept, propounding means what? Thinking deeply. In India, an untutored genius was creating paradise. Years ago, the little patch of the jungle has been cleaned and begun cleaning to make himself a garden sculpted with stone and recycled material is known as to the world today as the rock garden Chandigarh. Its 80 years old creator, director Nek Chand is how hailed as India's biggest contribution to outsider art. The 50th issue, okay, the 50th issue, that is spring 2005, Raw Vision, UK based magazine, pioneer in outsider art publication, features Nek Chand, and his rock garden, the sculpture Women by the Waterfall, on its anniversary issues cover. This is the picture given, anniversary is waterfall. So, this is the creation, so by whom? Nek Chand, as hailed as India's biggest contributor to outsider art. The notion of art brute or raw art was of works that were in the raw state as regards cultural and artistic influences. Anything and everything from a teen to seeing to us something Nek Chand has taken to dizzying heights. Recognizing his art as an outstanding testimony of the difference a single man can make when he lives his dream, the Swiss Commission for UNESCO will be honoring him by the way the European exposition of the works. The 5-month will be held at the leading museums. The 5-month would be an interactive show, realm of the Nek Chand, beginning from October, will be held at the leading museum in the Switzerland, Belgium, France and Italy. The biggest reward is walking through the garden and seeing the people enjoy my creations, Nek Chand says. So, when it was published 2005, that program was not held, but it held already and it was a very, very successful one. Okay, by whom? Nek Chand. So, here it concludes. So, there is a story, then part 1, and then part 1 there is a difference between Chinese art, drawing, another side European art. Chinese art is more of what? Natural creations, and the European art is more about practical, what the viewer sees, that has been reciprocated. But we will talk about the second form, the second part of the story. There is something is given, that is outsider art, that how that formal training of the drawers, okay, the painter, that is not there, but by chance, by the accident, whatever you could say, they become a painter by drawing the tiny things, small things, and making it integrated whole, like Nek Chand, the pioneer of Indian outsider art. So, this description is given here in a 2 different form, and the one picture, that rock garden sculpture made by broken bangles, Nek Chand, definitely very famous. Okay, so this is the story, the landscape of the soul. Let me conclude the story here now. Bye everyone. next video definitely I will come with the new chapter. Thank you everyone.